Welcome back to the Be Free Show on race. We're picking back up from season 1 on race, where we discussed 3 key points, and today we're just going to continue to build on 2 of them. So the 2 were know yourself. The less we know about race, the less we know about ourselves. And the second was to know systems. We said that racism will thrive until we overturn systems built on racism. We want to dig deeper into those today. I'm Ali. This is my good friend Anise.
Hi.
We forget to intro sometimes. Do you want to take us from there, Anise?
Yeah, so this first point of the less we know about race, the less we know about ourselves is really key. And what I want to talk about here is the history of race in the United States and how what I believe to be that if we understand the history of race in the United States, we'll be able to understand how racism impacts and has cheated not only people of color, but it's also cheated white people in our country. And, you know, this idea of different racial categories, you know, what's considered black, what's considered white, what's considered Asian, what's considered American Indian or Native American. So back in the early 20th century, you started to see a number of different immigrants coming into the United States, people from Japan, people from the Middle East, people from Southeast Asia. And the U.S. was really in sort of a holding pattern of like, who are these people, right? Because in many ways, the clear classifications we had were from people who came from Western Europe, so English folks. We had an understanding of Spain, you know, people who came from Spain, and we had an understanding of Native Americans who were already here, you know, on this land. And so what you start to see is the emergence of this term that's called a melting pot. And what it was a concerted, systemic effort to essentially have white people melt their culture into defining this one group as white. And so what happened is at that time, the only way you can own property and vote in the United States is if you were white. So you see interesting court cases where people from Syria, Japan, people from Southeast Asia petitioning the United States to view them as white so that they're able to possess land. So take that, put it to the side. Then you also had immigrants coming from Ireland. You had immigrants coming from Italy. And when they came into the United States, they were often forced to change their last names and oftentimes pressured to stop speaking their language in order to melt into this concept of whiteness in the United States, right? So that there could be clearer divisions. And this was a concerted effort. And to me, this is one of the reasons and one of the ways that racism hurts everyone. When people's ancestors immigrated here, they had to make the choice to stop teaching their language, to stop eating, you know, ethnic foods as a way to melt into white culture. And I'm going to pause there because I can talk about this forever. But that's one of the ways I feel like racism has cheated white people.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy hearing this and watching this as much as you all do because Anise is way more studied in this area than I am. But one of the things I do know is that as you're alluding to and speaking to, these classifications, these categories have very much been fluid throughout society. They continuously change, not just as a result of people petitioning, but as a result of the government, the Census Bureau, whatever, just kind of saying, I think these people are more Asian today. I mean, speaking to Arab people, we were classified as Asian, then we were classified as white. You know, it continues to change. And you have movements like the MENA movement now, the We Exist movement, that are saying we're done being invisible in society. You know, you may see us as white on this box, but white cops don't see me as white. You know, white educators in our schools who have low expectations of us because we're Arab Americans, they don't see me as white. And so I no longer want to be invisible in this society.
Yeah, and that's one of the ways in which, you know, whiteness was legislated. And oftentimes when I do trainings on race, I bring this up, and I have had white people say, I have heard from my grandmother and grandfather, our last names have been changed.
Right.
This is the actual last name of my grandfather or my grandmother, but we changed it. And I have found sharing that history of race in the United States has helped people to see in the ways in which racism has impacted white people. They lost a part of their culture, which I believe is sometimes at the heart of, you know, when I express my blackness or you express your Arabness, sometimes, you know, I have seen white people, you know, not like that, you know, we'll see it as a way of us not wanting to claim a connection to being from the United States. But I think what's often underneath that is less about someone not wanting me to display my blackness, but more of a sense of realizing the loss in their own culture, but not really having the right words to describe the ways in which their culture has been lost as a result to create this white category in the United States as a way to keep rights from people.
Wow.
You know, and so racism very much so has impacted white people just as much as it impacted black people, which is why we have to talk about it, because the less people know that history, right, the less they know about the history of race in the United States, then the more we're going to continue to have the injustices right now.
So I grew up in Dearborn, Michigan, which has the most densely populated, you know this, concentration of Muslims outside of the Middle East.
Right.
A lot of Arab countries, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, etc., Iraq. And I remember going to the University of Minnesota for college as an undergrad and meeting a lot of wonderful brothers and sisters who were also Lebanese, and Lebanese Christians. I grew up in a predominantly Muslim community, and they were a sect of Christianity called Maronite. They were Maronite Christians. And I remember a lot of them not identifying as Arab, in stark contrast to my community back home. And that was really eye-opening for me. I had never known of, I'm sorry, they didn't identify as Arab despite being Lebanese. And this was just like a paradigm shift for me. And I said, well, what do you identify as? And they would say Phoenician. And there's a whole history to that I don't want to dig into right now. But it's, when we say the less you know about race, the less you know about yourself, this is what we're talking about. There's so much history packed into our identity. And those identity politics, whether you think they don't impact your daily life or not, they do. Even if they're buried deep into your subconscious, they are impacting very much the way you see yourself, the way you see yourself in relation to others in society, the way you feel comfortable identifying, the parts of yourself you're embracing versus the parts you don't. It's really, really complex stuff, and it's important that we dig deep to better know ourselves.
And I just want to bring up one more comment, because I think it's similar to the way Arabs are classified in the United States. So in the census, they're classified as white. Right. So we know they're not treated as white. And then what was informative to me is when I learned that Latinos face the same challenge, right? So the U.S. considers them white as a race because of ancestry to Spain, right? So, but when you talk to many of the Latino friends I know, that's the same way. The cops don't treat them the same way. They still face injustices, right? So something as simple as when you look at a form and you have to fill out your race, you often see white non-Hispanic, black non-Hispanic. That's an example of the complexities of race in our country, in which a group of folks are categorized as white, but their experiences are not ones in which they're treated,
that benefit from white privilege.
Yeah, that benefit from white privilege. And that's really, I think, builds and connects to our second point, which is you have to know systems, because racism will thrive unless we overturn racist systems. Right. And the way we classify people in the United States on the census, on federal documents, is racist. Yeah. And unless we overturn it, we will keep having these same conversations about groups of people who have been put into a particular category because at that time it was advantageous to have this particular group be, the largest racial demographic in the country. Right.
A lot of times when we hear overturned systems built on racism, we think of this just huge monster of a system like the American government or something, and how are we ever going to overtake that? And we fail to realize the ways in which this impacts our local communities in much smaller, more conquerable, if that's a word, contexts. So one for me is, I grew up in Dearborn Public Schools. There are a lot of wonderful educators, both Arab and white, who are teaching in these schools and otherwise who teach in these schools. But there are also a lot of people who are bigoted, who are racist against Arabs, who have very low expectations of us. I grew up in a very inadequate going through a very inadequate public education system. It's one that my father dedicated his life to fighting against as a teacher, as an assistant principal, as a principal at a middle school, at a high school. He came up against so much bigotry, so much racism, Islamophobia, a multitude of issues. And it's really important that our parents who are immigrants, are first generation, and so many communities across America face these issues, are aware of these issues. And one unique thing that impacts my community is that at least when we look at other contexts across the U.S. and education system, we can crunch the numbers to say, all right, why are the white people in this district performing, 30, 40 percentage points higher than the non-white people in this district? Well, because we're all counted as white in Dearborn Public Schools, we don't have really the data to be able to say factually, there's something really, really wrong happening here. And that's intentional on the part of the district to not separate that out.
Yeah, and that's an example of what we would call like structural racism, right? It
Right.
means that racism is embedded into the very structures and ways in which we live the world, through education, through the healthcare system, right? Through the way cities are zoned and planned. And that makes me think about, ways in which we see racism systemically playing out. For example, in urban communities, right? So there is something we say amongst my friends, is like, you can tell when you're getting into a low income area or predominantly black area that's poor in a city is because you'll see a check into cash place, you'll see a number of fast food restaurants, you probably won't have a grocery store.
You'll see Martin Luther King Boulevard.
You'll see Martin Luther King Boulevard, and you will more than likely not have cafes or any sort of, immediate resources for folks in that particular community. Now, I'm outraged by that, right? For so many reasons of predatory practices with lending, to healthy access to food, right? To this wouldn't go down. Like the neighborhood that I live in now in LA, it wouldn't happen, right? People would say, and you will not find any of those businesses. So why is it okay on the south side of Chicago, where I'm from, to have that? Or why is it okay in a rural town in Iowa where I went to do my graduate work? Why is it okay for those things and those businesses and predatory practices to be in those communities, but not in suburbia or in Beverly Hills or in Santa Monica? That's a problem there, right? That's an example of structural racism, right? And how we zone rights to people.
Right, absolutely. I mean, if you're out there and you're like, wait, is this the episode on race or is this the episode on activism? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we can't disentangle these two.
Right.
So much of the activism that needs to happen in our society worldwide. We talked about colorism in the last season, and we're not focusing as much on it right now. But so much of it centers on racism. So much of it centers on people thinking that they are superior to other human beings and systematically oppressing them. And so it's heavy stuff.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought in the activism piece, because it does connect. And, someone may say, well, how do I address predatory practices in Chicago? Or how do I address the fact that there aren't any there aren't any healthy food stores in certain neighborhoods? So every city, whether it's a big city or a small town or a suburb, has ways for local citizens to get involved, okay? Yeah. They have committees and commissions that is stated in their municipal codes that it is for nonpartisan local residents, as long as you pay your city taxes, to be able to apply to be on these committees. Yeah. And I'll use a personal example. When I lived in the city of Durham, I was on our Human Relations Commission, right, which is charged with promoting human relations and peace and, reducing conflict amongst races. And the only way I came to know about that commission is because I got an email, through my homeowners association that said, hey, we are looking for people to fill this commission. Yes. And, you can go to any local city website or call your city office to say, hey, I'm interested in serving. There is it for human relations. There's a specific commission for how do we add parks. There's a specific commission that looks at ensuring equity. I mean, for everything you can think about within a city and how a city functions, there's boards and commissions that are open to local citizens. And that is a way that I want to weave in race and activism and encourage people to think about how you can be a part of a committee that meets once a month, that's charged with making sure that we have resources that are accessible to everyone, in our cities and in our towns. Now,
there's no doubt that if somebody were to do that, to take you up on this, invitation, that they would learn a lot about themselves. But there may be some people out there that feel, I have more internal work to do. You and I are very much about free self to free society. And I know you've attended some incredible, I'm blanking on the names right now, some incredible conferences that really center on the exploration of your own racial identity, of race as a construct. Can you talk about what some of those resources are out there and how people might tap into them?
Yeah, so I'll just talk about one it's just sort of in the essence of time, but one that's been near and dear to me is the Social Justice Training Institute. So simple website, sjti.org. And the focus of this institute is to bring together people from all races to engage in deep work around race. They bring us together, from various ages, various sectors. And in this institute for 5 days, you're in a hotel, right? You sign up for this. And this is about understanding the role race has played in your life, understanding the role that race plays in our society, and understanding the ways in which we perpetuate racism. So racism exists is because everyone around us holds up the system of racism. That's why it exists. Yeah. And it peels back those layers. It's raw. I learned when I was there, and I consider myself to be someone who was a social justice activist who's been engaged in communities. I learned the ways in which I perpetuate prejudice, amongst other racial groups, right? So it was just a way, and I was perpetuated because I didn't understand all these layers that I had learned, and I didn't realize I was having mindsets about groups that was a result of what I was seeing in the media or my lack of learning.
Right.
And so I highly recommend something like an sjti.org. You'll see now that a number of cities are having they're using their human relations commissions to do sort of dinners and summits with people. So, for example, LA has Embrace LA, which was a move to get people to come together and have dinner and break bread with one another across the city of different racial groups.
Right, right. So I want to say something to our white brothers and sisters out there who I love dearly. Many of you are in this work, trying to do this racial identity work. You come against or you come across people of color like Anissa and I, all across, America. You're trying to engage in these conversations, and sometimes you feel like you're coming up against anger, against unwillingness to really engage in this critical dialogue, what you may perceive to be as an unwillingness. But of course, many of you are able to empathize with the fact that many people of color, just like poor white people in society, for example, are facing many layers of oppression. And what I encourage you to do, I believe, one of the most revolutionary acts you can do as a white ally in this work is to stay in it, to stay in the conversation, to overcome the fear, the anxiety you have about having difficult conversations around race, and doing that difficult internal work, and really just staying in it. I think it demonstrates not only to yourself, which is most important, your own commitment to really being part of a world that is creating a more just and equitable place for all, but it demonstrates to your allies on the other side that you're really in this for greater human prosperity.
Yeah, and I just would add really quickly, stay in it and use that as an opportunity for you to do work with other white people. The type of security that you can provide another white person to talk about race is one that I think would be hard for me to do as a woman of color, because I think, the fear of, am I going to say the right thing, right? And something that SJTI does, they do race caucuses where they put white people together to talk about race, people of color, and then as people of color, we break out and do Latinos, we do Black, because it creates a safety net for people to get vulnerable and just share their questions and begin to unpack, the different ways that they're being impacted by racism. So I would encourage you to do everything Ali said and connect with other white people that are passionate about the work. Talk to your friends, talk to your family members, and begin those conversations there.
One more very quick thing. This was not a ramp up to tell white people what they should do. We equally believe all of us, people of color, need to do this racial identity work as well. We hope we made that clear in this episode. Please engage with us, comment, ask questions, criticize constructively. It's all in the name of love. We really want that back and forth. Find us anywhere online at Be Free Show. Until next time, we love you and be free.